Imagine, imagine pouring your heart into helping others, building a
Yeah.
successful career and everything. That's still like being haunted by a past relationship.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that was Dr. Amy Harwick's reality.
Yeah, exactly.
And sadly, it's a reality for many, especially, women in their 40s and 50s, who might be looking back at relationships, and wondering, what if,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
It's kind of like a universal fear almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
But today we're diving deep into the story of Dr. Amy Harwick.
A prominent Hollywood therapist.
Exactly. And it's a story that really underscores how important it is to understand domestic violence.
Not just the physical signs, but the
Yeah.
emotional and psychological scars it leaves behind.
That's what we're going to be looking at today. The events leading up to Amy's murder by her ex-boyfriend, Gareth Pursehouse, and the legal battle that followed.
Right.
We'll be drawing our insights mainly from the Wondery podcast, 48 Hours, Justice for Amy Harwick.
Which features interviews with her family, friends, even the lead detective on the case.
Gives us a really well-rounded picture, I think.
Yeah, definitely a multifaceted view of the case. And what I found so fascinating is how the podcast unveils this contrast between Amy's public image,
Right.
this successful, vibrant therapist,
Yeah.
and the private battle that she was fighting against a past that just wouldn't let go.
It's crazy. To really grasp the depth of this tragedy, I think we need to start by understanding who Amy was.
Yeah.
Beyond the headlines, right?
Absolutely. Her parents, Penny and Tom, they paint this picture of a woman who was full of life.
Yeah.
Adopted into a loving family. She embraced everything with open arms, even developing a love for heavy metal music thanks to her brother Chris.
I love that.
From a young age, she just had this incredible drive to help and understand people.
Really?
Yeah.
It's like she was almost destined for a career as a therapist.
It seems that way.
But her path to success, wasn't without its dark turns.
Especially when you look at her relationship with Gareth Pursehouse.
Yeah.
That relationship was volatile, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
There were documented instances of choking, suffocation, and physical assault.
Oh.
Amy even took photos of her injuries. They're difficult to even look at. It's just heartbreaking to imagine what she endured. You'd think taking legal action, like getting a restraining order against Gareth, would provide some peace of mind.
It's kind of like the go-to, right?
You would think so, right? But it speaks volumes about the power dynamics of abusive relationships.
Mhm.
Even with legal protection, the fear often lingers. Amy's story unfortunately highlights that restraining orders, while helpful, aren't always enough.
That's it's pretty heavy. It wasn't just Amy who noticed these red flags.
No, her friend, Rudy Torres, witnessed Gareth's obsessive behavior firsthand.
Really?
He talks about how Gareth would relentlessly try to contact Amy even after she made it clear their relationship was over. Rudy's account is crucial because it backs up Amy's fears. It gives us a glimpse into Gareth's personality, this fixation on Amy, his inability to accept that it was over.
Right. It's almost like a textbook case of stalking.
Exactly.
That possessiveness, that controlling behavior, it's terrifying. And what's even more troubling is that, like, as Amy started to gain recognition in her career, those fears just seemed to amplify.
This is where things take an interesting turn. Amy was making a name for herself, working with high-profile clients like the model Emily Sears.
Really?
Helping them deal with the anxieties of dating, even the trauma of past abusive relationships.
That's interesting. It's like ironic, isn't it?
It is.
She's guiding others through the very issues she was struggling with herself.
Exactly. And amidst all this professional success, there was this underlying current of anxiety, fueled by Gareth's persistent presence in her life.
I see.
Imagine achieving so much, yet always looking over your shoulder.
That's tough to imagine. And then on top of all that, to add another layer of complexity, she gets engaged to Drew Carey.
The comedian and host of The Price is Right.
Yeah.
That engagement brought a whole new level of public attention, and it seemed to trigger even more vulnerability in Amy.
Oh, wow.
She was worried that Gareth's fixation would spiral with her increased fame. Think about it.
Yeah.
For someone who has experienced domestic violence, being in the spotlight can feel like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, for sure.
On the one hand, you have a platform, potentially a support system, but on the other, you're exposed.
Right.
Potentially vulnerable to someone who wants to harm you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unfortunately, Amy's fears were far from unfounded.
Yeah.
The events leading up to her murder are a grim reminder of the escalating danger she faced and her desperate attempts to reclaim control over her life.
One of the most chilling incidents, I think, occurred at an awards show.
Where Gareth publicly confronted Amy,
Really?
verbally harassing her,
Oh, wow.
leaving her visibly shaken. Witnesses described him as agitated, blaming Amy for ruining his life. It was a clear indication that his obsession was reaching a boiling point.
That's scary.
And it's in the aftermath of that confrontation that Amy takes a chillingly prophetic step.
What's that?
She starts sharing her location with friends, almost as if she knows what's coming.
Oh.
Her words were, "If something happens to me, he did it." Those words, knowing what we know now, send chills down my spine.
Yeah.
It highlights the very real fear Amy was living with, and tragically, the fear that would ultimately be realized.
So to understand the events of that tragic night, I think we need to look at the prosecution's timeline.
They meticulously pieced it together using surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and forensic evidence.
Okay.
This timeline is crucial because it reveals the premeditation behind Gareth's actions. On Valentine's Day 2020, while Amy was out with friends, Gareth was caught on camera lurking outside her home. Later that evening, he broke in through the French doors, the very doors Amy had expressed concern about,
Oh, wow.
and lay in wait.
That detail, to me, is one of the most chilling aspects of this case. It suggests he was intent on ambushing Amy.
Catching her off guard.
Catching her off guard, yeah.
Yeah.
And tragically, that's exactly what happened. When Amy arrived home in the early hours of February 15th, she was met with a horrifying sight. Gareth lying in wait in her own bedroom.
What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. Amy fought back with everything she had. She even bit Gareth, leaving marks on his arm, scratched his face, giving him a black eye.
Wow.
But she was no match for his size and strength.
In the midst of that struggle, the prosecution believes Gareth dropped a syringe filled with liquid nicotine.
It's a chilling detail that suggests he may have initially planned to subdue Amy and inject her, potentially staging her death as an accident or even a suicide.
Right.
It's a truly disturbing thought.
It is.
And it points to a level of premeditation and cruelty that's hard to grasp.
Yeah, that's really, that's tough to think about. Thankfully, though, Amy's roommate, Michael Herman, was home that night.
He heard the commotion and yelled, likely disrupting Gareth's initial plan.
Okay.
The prosecution believes Michael's intervention may have saved his own life.
Oh, wow.
But tragically, it led to a more violent outcome for Amy.
It's like a haunting what-if scenario.
Yeah.
What if Michael hadn't been there? Would Gareth have gone through with the injection? It just underscores the chaotic nature of these situations, you know?
How quickly things can escalate.
Yeah, exactly. In a final act of desperation, Gareth carried Amy, who was likely barely conscious from being strangled, to the third-story balcony and threw her over the railing.
He couldn't have her, so he decided no one could.
Yeah. Gareth fled the scene, leaving Amy to die from the injuries sustained in the fall. Her roommate, Michael, frantically called 911 and tried to help, but it was too late.
Michael's account of that night is both harrowing and heroic. To be confronted with such a scene, yet still have the presence of mind to call for help, it's remarkable.
It is. While the physical evidence was stacking up against Gareth, his defense team would later try to paint a very different picture, shifting the blame onto Amy herself. But before we delve into those legal arguments, I think it's important, especially for our listeners who might be in that 45 to 60 age range, to understand the red flags of domestic violence.
Absolutely. Amy's story is a harsh reminder that abuse comes in many forms. Not just physical violence,
Right.
but emotional manipulation and controlling behavior. No one deserves to live in fear, and there are resources available to help.
And for those of you who are new to the deep dive, we encourage you to subscribe and join us for part 2, where we'll explore the trial, the shocking defense strategy that emerged, and the emotional roller coaster of the jury's deliberation. We'll also examine the impact of Amy's loss on those she touched and the ongoing efforts to improve laws and support systems for victims of domestic violence. So make sure you stay tuned for that. So the trial begins, and it quickly becomes clear that the defense is trying to, shift the narrative. You know what I mean?
Right. They're not denying Garrett's involvement in Amy's death, but they are trying to argue that it wasn't intentional murder.
Yeah. Yeah. They're acknowledging he was there and everything, but
It's a tricky strategy. They're acknowledging his presence at the scene and his actions, but they're trying to minimize his culpability.
exactly. They're essentially saying, he broke into her home, waited for her, but only because he wanted to talk.
Which seems like a stretch when you consider the lengths he went to gain entry, you know?
Right.
He wore gloves, he covered cameras. Those actions don't exactly scream, I just want to chat.
No, not really. And then there's the whole issue of the nicotine-filled syringe.
The defense claimed he brought it with him to commit suicide,
Really?
not to harm Amy.
But again, that argument doesn't quite hold up. If his intention was to end his own life, why break into Amy's home and wait for her?
Yeah, it just doesn't add up.
No, it really doesn't. It feels like they were grasping at straws, hoping to introduce enough reasonable doubt that the jury wouldn't convict on first-degree murder.
And to be fair, they had an uphill battle. The prosecution had built a strong case, meticulously laying out the timeline,
Right.
highlighting Gareth's obsessive behavior and the premeditation of his actions.
Yeah. And they also presented powerful testimony from those who knew Amy best, including her roommate, Michael Herman.
His firsthand account of the struggle was particularly chilling.
Oh, yeah. He described hearing Amy's screams, the sounds of, like, a violent confrontation.
Michael's testimony is crucial because he was the only other person in the house that night.
Right.
It gave the jury a visceral understanding of what transpired.
And perhaps the most damaging piece of evidence against Gareth was this recording of a jailhouse conversation between him and his friends shortly after his arrest.
In that recording, he's heard joking about being a bad boy, showing no remorse for Amy's death.
It's incredibly disturbing to listen to. There's this complete lack of empathy, you know?
Yeah, right.
Any acknowledgement of the life he took.
It likely had a significant impact on the jury's perception of Gareth. It revealed a callousness that's hard to ignore.
Yeah. And then, in a moment that must have been incredibly emotional for everyone in the courtroom, the prosecution read aloud an email that Amy had written to herself. Just hours after that disturbing encounter with Gareth at the award show.
In that email, she expressed her fear, writing, "It terrifies me that he's obsessed with me for 9 years, thinks about me every day. He's focused on harming me."
Wow. It's like she knew what was coming.
It was a powerful moment in the trial. It gave the jury a direct glimpse into Amy's state of mind in those final weeks.
Yeah, that's heavy. The defense, in an attempt to counter this emotional blow, actually suggested that Amy might have initiated the physical altercation.
Claiming that she preemptively attacked Gareth out of fear.
So they were trying to shift the blame onto the victim.
It was a risky move, and one that could easily backfire. Trying to shift the blame onto the victim is a strategy that rarely sits well with the jury.
Especially when all the evidence points to her being the one in danger.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to say that Amy was somehow responsible for her own death. That kind of argument often comes across as insensitive and dismissive of the power dynamics at play in abusive relationships.
And then, in a surprising twist, the defense decided to rest its case without calling a single witness, including their expert on the balcony fall.
This decision left a lot of people scratching their heads. It seemed like a missed opportunity to present their side of the story.
Yeah, to challenge the prosecution's theory of how Amy died.
Perhaps they realized the evidence against their client was just too strong. Or maybe they thought that by not presenting a defense, they'd somehow make the prosecution's case seem less convincing.
I see. Whatever the reasoning, it was a gamble that didn't seem to pay off.
As the case went to the jury, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the verdict.
So the jurors deliberated for 2 days.
Weighing the evidence, the arguments, and ultimately the fate of Gareth Pursehouse.
Right.
And after those 2 days, they finally reached a decision. Guilty of first-degree murder, with the special circumstance of lying in wait. It was a significant victory for the prosecution.
And there was a sense of relief in the courtroom, especially for Amy's loved ones who had endured such a grueling trial.
It was a moment of mixed emotions. Relief that justice had been served, but also profound sadness over the loss of a vibrant life.
Yeah, it's kind of bittersweet in a way, right?
It is.
Because, a guilty verdict can't bring Amy back. The impact of her murder continues to ripple through the lives of those she touched.
And in the wake of her death, her friends and family have channeled their grief into action, supporting that petition to change domestic violence laws in California.
Wow.
They're fighting for stronger protections for victims, harsher penalties for abusers, and really trying to raise awareness about the warning signs of abuse.
That's amazing. It's inspiring to see them taking such proactive steps, turning their pain into a force for positive change.
Amy's case highlights the urgent need for greater awareness, support, and systemic change when it comes to domestic violence.
But before we move on to the sentencing and the lasting legacy of Amy Harwick, We want to pause here for a moment. For those of you just joining us, make sure to subscribe to the deep dives for a deeper understanding of captivating and thought-provoking topics like this one. 2 months after that guilty verdict, the courtroom reconvened, for Gareth Pursouse's sentencing. And this was a chance for Amy's loved ones to directly address the court and really speak about the impact of her loss.
Imagine facing the person who took away someone you love,
Right.
Having to relive those painful memories in such a public setting. It's a testament to their strength that they were willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So did they have the opportunity to speak directly to Gareth?
They did. Amy's parents, Penny and Tom, as well as several of her closest friends, they delivered incredibly powerful victim impact statements. They spoke about Amy's infectious laugh, her passion for her work, the bright future that was stolen from her. It was heartbreaking to listen to, but also incredibly moving.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that murder isn't just a crime against an individual. It ripples outward, impacting a whole network of people.
And in Amy's case, that network was vast. She touched so many lives, not just through her work as a therapist, but through her advocacy, her warmth, her genuine compassion. Those who knew her felt that loss deeply.
During those statements, did Gareth express any remorse for his actions?
Not at all. He remained stoic throughout the entire hearing, never acknowledging the pain he had caused, never offering an apology.
That lack of remorse must have been incredibly difficult for Amy's loved ones to witness.
It was, but in the end, the judge handed down the maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
It was a small victory in the face of such a devastating loss.
It was.
Justice was served, but it can't erase what happened.
Right.
It can't bring Amy back.
And that's where the focus shifts, I think, from punishment to legacy.
Right.
What can we learn from this?
Yeah.
What can we do to prevent future tragedies?
What can we do?
In the aftermath of the trial, Amy's loved ones channeled their grief into action, supporting that petition to change domestic violence laws in California. They're fighting for stronger protections for victims, harsher penalties for abusers, really trying to raise awareness about the warning signs of abuse.
It's inspiring to see them, taking such proactive steps, turning their pain into a force for positive change.
Amy's story is a tragic reminder that domestic violence can affect anyone. It doesn't discriminate based on social status, profession, or outward appearance. It's crucial to be aware of the warning signs, not just the physical ones, but the emotional and psychological manipulation that can be just as damaging.
It's a reminder that we need to create a culture where survivors feel safe and supported in coming forward.
Absolutely.
A culture where their voices are heard and believed.
Exactly. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Reach out for help, whether it's for yourself or someone you care about. There are resources available, people who understand and want to help.
I think Amy's story, while heartbreaking, also highlights the power of resilience.
Yeah.
The capacity to find meaning and purpose, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Her friends and family, by channeling their grief into action, are ensuring that her legacy lives on, hopefully preventing others from suffering the same fate.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the story of Dr. Amy Harwick. It's a complex story, one that raises a lot of questions about domestic violence, the legal system, and ultimately how we can create a safer world for everyone.
If you found this deep dive valuable, we encourage you to subscribe and join us for more explorations into these thought-provoking topics. We'll continue to bring you nuanced information and analysis going beyond the headlines to explore the stories that matter.
Thank you for listening.